Episode 227. Hi, I'm Scott Langdon, and this week on God and Autobiography, the podcast, we reintroduce you to the fascinating story of God's revelation through Zoroaster. Next week on the show, Jerry welcomes back a special friend of the program, Matt Carden, for our 26th edition of the Life Wisdom Project. And the two discuss the very interesting episode 26, Zoroaster Sees God's Other Side. God explains about God's other side and how Zoroaster picked up on a way to articulate that apparently dual nature. Be sure to join Jerry and his special guest Matt Carden next week on our 26th Life Wisdom Project episode. And now, here's episode 26, Zoroaster Sees God's Other Side. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm your host, Scott Langdon, and this is episode 227. Next week on the show, Jerry welcomes back a special friend of the program, Matt Carden, and the two discuss the very interesting episode 26, Zoroaster Sees God's Other Side. It's in this episode that God tells Jerry about his ancient encounter with Zoroaster and how that interaction was a growth experience for God as well as for Zoroaster and all of humanity. God explains about God's other side and how Zoroaster picked up on a way to articulate that apparently dual nature. Be sure to join Jerry and his special guest Matt Carden next week on our 26th Life Wisdom Project episode. And now, here is episode 26, Zoroaster Sees God's Other Side. I hope you enjoy the episode. Episode 26. There was one day, even before praying, I felt anxiety rising, an agitated foreboding. I told myself, avoid surprises, just review the route already taken. Maybe I should start with your message and then go over your personal development?
No, they can't be separated in that way. Take Zoroaster, for example. I wasn't trying to communicate my dual nature. I was just being me. And it is an aspect of me that he picked up on and articulated very sharply, perhaps too sharply. But that interaction between Zoroaster and me was a growth experience for me, as well as for him and humankind. I came to see my other side more clearly.
Okay, this was it. His other side? Take a deep breath and keep walking. Other side? What is that, Lord?
I am limited and incomplete. In a sense, not all-powerful. In a sense, not all-knowing. In a sense, not all good. I am searching for my own fullness. And since I am also the world, the totality of I, the world, humanity, are all seeking fullness together in partnership.
God continued to ride roughshod over my lifelong understanding of what God, if he existed, would have to be like. Before Moses, before Akhenaten, before Zoroaster himself, there was what was known simply as the old religion. From roughly the 4th millennium BCE, it was practiced by people living on the South Russian steppes. The old religion affirmed a cosmic order, later called Asha by the Persians, that ensures the regularity of the stars and the seasons and orderly existence for the community. The human order is part of this cosmic order. Virtue, especially truth, honesty, loyalty, and courage, sustains the natural order. Vice disrupts it. Prayer and sacrifice support Asha, which is also upheld by the highest god, Ahura Mazda, literally the Lord Wisdom, who submits to it as well. In this effort, he is aided by 6 lesser gods, the holy immortals: good purpose, best righteousness, holy devotion, desirable dominion, health, and long life.
Yes, they perceived the order of the cosmos, which is physical, spiritual, and moral. Worship and sacrifice are rightful parts of that order. Without them, human beings are not in their proper place, and I cannot be in mine. So something is rotten in Denmark when a person ignores me or snubs me or glorifies himself or herself. The individual soul, the family, the community, and I are all thrown out of kilter, distorted, put awry by such actions and attitudes. Worship and sacrifice put things in their proper order. They orient the soul to me, and they allow me to enter into the person and provide guidance and safety.
The cosmogony of the old religion starts with the sky and water and earth, not unlike Genesis. The gods create 3 prototypical creatures, who are then offered for sacrifice. All life springs from this sacrifice, and as the Zoroastrian scholar Mary Boyce puts it, the cycle of being is thus set in motion.
Yes, there is a deep truth here. The world is a sacrifice. And by that I mean the act of creation is a sacrifice. An ongoing existence is a sacrifice. It is a sacrifice for me, more precisely for the God beyond God, to enter the world. And the world itself is a sacrificial offering. It is a place of struggle and suffering, not just for living creatures, but for me as well. But like a sacrifice, it is a struggle that makes sacred, that makes holy, that honors and submits to the ultimate divine ordering. I submit to that, and the world must submit to that.
I don't understand why it's necessary to create a world at all if it contains such suffering.
You see, holiness unto itself is nothing. Pure, bland, eternal perfection is nothing. It is not even perfection. It has not been mediated, as Hegel would say. It has no internal complexity, no development, no achievement. It has the perfection of a blank sheet of paper. For the soul, including my soul, there must be spiritual growth, not just a placid acceptance of untested consciousness, a self that does not yet know itself to be a self, a goodness that has not yet fought evil and temptation. The greatest evil is always within. Even the plenitude of being idea is not without merit.
This is the idea that the best world would be one brimming with as much being as possible. And so God created a world filled with every gradation of being, from the most perfect down to the least perfect. Boyce explains that each day rituals reenacted the original sacrifice.
Of course, each of our lives reenact and is engaged in the sacrifice at every moment.
What about the old religion's views on death and the hereafter?
It has to do with the meaning of life. Death is always about the meaning of life. Afterlife is always about the assessment or judgment of life.
Central to this religion was the sanctity of oaths, contracts, and treaties, stable elements in a violent world, protected by the high god, Mithra. Lord, isn't this emphasis on oaths overdone?
Good question. A person's word is sacred. What is the basic bond between people that expresses the I and the thou? It is speaking truthfully and giving one's word, backed by one's honor and integrity and personhood. They were right to fix on the sacredness of one's word.
According to Boyce, and I quote, "A power was felt to be latent in the spoken pledge, and this power came to be recognized as a divinity."
Of course, think about it. What miracle permits human beings to speak truthfully of things, with all that implies for the referential capacity of language, for the ability of experience and evidence to reach the truth of things, not to mention higher truths, mathematical or conceptual or metaphysical or cosmogonic. In a sense, all knowledge reaching out to things, consciousness reaching out beyond itself, is a divine act, is inspired, filled with my spirit. What do you think is the tie that connects the mind to the object? Just light rays and the like? But you know how little that explains. It doesn't even explain how you know light rays.
Yes, I see what you mean.
Now think of the further act, the promise. It is made to a person. That requires a further miracle, the recognition of the other as other, even recognizing objects as other, not merely as parts of one's own stream of consciousness, David Hume's impressions and ideas, is a kind of miracle. And so is recognizing someone else, not only as another object, but as another person, another center of subjectivity and action, will and purpose, of goodness and potential for evil, of spiritual striving and participation in the divine.
Lord, I thought we were talking about oaths and giving one's word.
Think of how it is possible for one such center not only to communicate ideas and intentions to another, but to make a commitment. What is a commitment? It is a moral fact. It creates an ethical relationship between you and the promise that did not previously exist. This is a reality, but not of a physical type. Nor is it adequate to call it an institutional fact, as if it were simply a shorthand for describing customs or conventions. It is a real fact. An obligation now exists.
I'm not sure I follow. What do you mean an obligation is a real fact?
Among the things a complete account of the universe would have to include are obligations created by promises. Institutions do not explain promises, but the other way around. Institutions are complex ethical facts created by commitments and other relationships of an ethical sort, such as parent and child. If you leave out the ethical phenomenon and describe these merely as social patterns, as sociologists do, there's no miracle here, but such descriptions are not complete, and therefore, however accurate, not really adequate. How are ethical facts, which are non-physical and also not just states of consciousness, possible? Because of me. Ethical facts are spiritual facts. There is a relationship between people that occurs only within the spiritual matrix that is my presence in the world. In living the ethical life, people are participating in me.
It was this fine old religion that Zoroaster, who was one of its priests, was about to throw into disarray and rage.
Zoroaster had a great yearning for the truth and for knowing me. He sought to understand not just the forms and procedures, but the meaning. Of course, some of his teachers were wise and also in touch with me, but he was more persistent, more open, and had a more flexible and creative mind so he could take in more. He was my first really great prophet.
He spent years wandering in search of truth?
Yes, this is what made him remarkable. Most people, even most spiritually attuned people, are not really seekers. They mainly have some truths they nourish and try to apply to their lives. The ancient religion was already quite good, but Zoroaster sensed that there was something more, both in understanding and in living a spiritual life. So he sought out all the great teachers and seers of his day, and he prayed and meditated and listened with an open ear. So one day I came to him. He actually saw me in several of my aspects, and my message came through to him in a totally articulate manner.
Zoroaster was seeking truth. The Lord Wisdom was looking for a messenger. They were searching for each other. Then one morning, as Zoroaster was purifying himself in the river, he beheld on the bank a shining being, who revealed himself as Good Purpose. The priest was brought into the presence of the Lord Wisdom and 5 other figures so radiant, quote, he did not see his own shadow upon the earth, owing to their great light, end quote. In the collection of hymns known as the Gathas, Zoroaster, who was also called Zarathustra, reports addressing the Lord Wisdom, Then as wholly I have recognized thee, the Lord Wisdom, when the Holy Spirit attended me with good purpose and asked me, Who art thou? Whose art thou? Then I said to him first, I am Zarathustra. Were I able, I should be a true foe to the deceiver, but a strong support to the just one. This encounter began as a series of visions, revealing a single God who created everything that was created, including the other divine beings, who could also be seen as aspects of himself. For it is written that they are, quote, of one mind, one voice, one act, end quote. Then Ahura Mazda, the Lord Wisdom, is also you?
Yes, that is me. Go back to the cosmogonic accounts I have told you. I am exploding, both I as the universe am exploding, and I as the mind and telos of the universe am struggling to create order and purpose and direction. All the parts of the universe, including all the spiritual parts or aspects of me, are expanding at work, involved in creating and directing things, both physical and spiritual. These parts or aspects of me are not always well integrated, any more than they are in a human personality. Just as your desires or temperament sometimes seem to have a life of their own, some of my aspects have a life of their own. Among the things I must order and provide direction to are my own aspects.
If you are all in pieces, how can you bring them together, Lord?
I do this through wisdom, my own calm center, that views or oversees all, assesses all, weighs it in the balance, pacifies disturbances. There is, of course, an analog for human beings, but this story is not just metaphor. This was really me, struggling to supersede other aspects of myself and to be worshipped in my highest manifestation, not in my separate and sometimes truculent parts.
Zoroaster beheld not one God, but 2, one good and one his evil twin. The Lord Wisdom was the embodiment of goodness and wisdom. Angra Mainyu, literally the hostile spirit, was the personification of pure evil.
Yes, Zoroaster had the full experience of evil, and he took it in and did not dismiss it or discount it. This is one of my most important communications. The experience of evil is a spiritual experience. It comes from me. You would not be able to see it for evil otherwise. People would see it as bad luck or just one of those things or a character disorder or bad personality. To look evil in the face is a spiritual act, and it requires being in touch with me and looking, as it were, through my eyes.
So evil is real.
Evil is indeed a demonic force. It is not just privation or bad upbringing. It is a force on its own, spiritual in nature, not just physical. What else would it be? And it works outside and within. And it works in me as well as in people and in all of nature. It is not just a phenomenon of decay or entropy or mortality. It is distortion, warping, perversion, twisting of things from their rightful nature, like a malignant cancer.
And you wanted Zoroaster to understand that.
The question was how to communicate that fact, how to give Zoroaster a vision that lives up to his own experience, the phenomenon of evil that he has seen through my eyes. I did it by showing him both sides of myself as two gods. They are, of course, not equally powerful. I am very much more the positive than the negative side, as most people are. And there's no question that the positive will win in the end. But evil is very powerful, a force to be reckoned with. And as powerful as its outer dimension is, its inner dimension is much more powerful. I revealed myself as two gods in mortal combat. A limitation of the ancient religion was that it venerated and therefore understood only the good aspects of me in the world. But that is to miss the whole story of what life on this plane is about. It is about the inner and outer ethical and spiritual struggle. In the end, you cannot separate the two. I taught Zoroaster about this aspect of things in the most vivid way possible. I showed my other side to him as a separate God, the hostile spirit that works to undermine the divine order.
The scripture records, "Truly there are two primal spirits, twins, in conflict, the good and the bad. When these two spirits first encountered, they created life and not life. At the end, the worst existence shall be for the followers of falsehood, drudge, but the best dwelling for those who possess righteousness, asha. Of the two spirits, the one who follows falsehood chose doing the worst things, and the holiest spirit, clad in the strongest stone, chose righteousness. And so shall they all who will satisfy the Lord wisdom with just actions."
Yes, very precise. Notice the language. The two gods are twins, a tip-off that there are two sides of the same being. Who doesn't have two sides? Life and not life are obvious placeholders for order and disorder, or right order and wrong order. If you want to have a good life, you pursue asha, righteousness. And if you don't, you'll have a bad life. The generative role of falsehood is explicit here, that the source of evil is falsehood, not living in truth. It is implied that the holiest spirit is stronger, clad in stone.
The Lord Wisdom foresaw that, if he were to create the world, the hostile spirit would attack it precisely because it was good. The world would become a battleground. He knew that in the end he would win, but he would need our help, for we too must choose sides. So shall we all.
It is inevitable that evil attacks good precisely because it is good. It is goodness that evil must stamp out, or pervert, or turn against itself.
At first, the hostile spirit did not know about the Lord Wisdom, but the Lord Wisdom knew about his evil twin, what he plotted in his enviousness to do. After a lengthy era of peace, the hostile spirit arose from the deep and beheld the light of the Lord Wisdom's domain, and prompted by his lust of smite and his envious nature, he immediately attacked it, only to encounter valor and supremacy greater than his own, as the divine beings rallied their forces.
Note that the divine beings do not attack, but respond to an attack. The good are always on the defensive, with evil attacking them.
The hostile spirit needed help. He crawled back to darkness and recruited devas, devils, frightful and putrid and evil, to fight on his side. And somehow even these devils are an aspect of you, Lord?
My aspects have, to some extent, a life of their own and go wayward. One reason is simply their functional autonomy. Just as the stomach wants to just do its job, even if it is doing it in a way counterproductive sometimes for the organism, or in society, the lawyers are just doing their job, even when it causes larger harm. They're living out their distinctive virtues, but that is not always adequate from the point of view of the whole. The other reason is more perverse, and that comes from my own incomplete and undeveloped nature. Just as a nice person occasionally feels like irritating others, or takes pleasure in schadenfreude, or deflects in behavior to avoid facing a certain truth, that is the deceiver, the element of lie in all of us. Even the first type of counterproductive behavior is a kind of lie, since it consists in confusing the good of the part with the good of the whole. A lie because it is often done quite knowingly. People take refuge, like Eichmann, in saying, I was only doing my job, or they avoid confronting evil by saying, in effect, it's not my job.
Then, as the scripture records, having rallied the devas, the hostile spirit rose for battle. Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.